This is the Brave Ideas Podcast, brought to you by Aqua.
Welcome to episode 24 of the Brave Ideas Podcast, the show that is all about bringing to life fresh perspectives from the worlds of digital and marketing. I'm Dan Herman. I'm a digital strategist. I'm recently engaged, and I'm jealous that one of my colleagues went to South by Southwest. And I'm here today with my co-host.
I'm Esther. I'm Head of Conversation Analytics and advocate of the No Sounds, No Smells Open Plan Office Lunch movement.
Today, we are really excited to have as our guest Richard Dunn, Chief Strategy Officer at Wunderman, Europe, Middle East and Africa. Richard has a number of very interesting stories, including the one time he took a motorbike trip to the Arctic, and the one time he was interviewed for a murder from which he was eliminated from the list of suspects. And of course, making a murderer was not based on the story of his life. Richard is here today to talk to us about content and commerce. So Richard, what's new?
So what's new for us is we're finding as an agency a key role for us and a key role for marketing is to build a regular engaged audience for a brand. So there's a proposition that we have which is helping brands become a publisher, where instead of doing one-off communications, instead of just thinking around campaigns, we actually start to think about how over time we're going to build a group of people that regularly come to hear from that brand, who regularly come to enjoy the content that the brand offers and actually start to interact with that brand too.
If I'm understanding what you're saying, you're suggesting that what brands need to do today is build audiences through content that will enable them to sell. But doesn't that feel like a strange combination?
Well, funny. You can say that it feels like quite an indirect way to work because, if you're trying to sell, why not just go straight for the sell? But what we're finding is that brands, certainly people are increasingly ignoring digital advertising. So I saw some really interesting charts the other day about the rise of ad blockers, and actually, interestingly, how as retargeting has come into play, ad blockers have risen even quicker. So even relevant targeted advertising can be screened out, and people aren't necessarily super keen to engage with it all the time. It still has a very powerful role. But what if you could build a group of people who genuinely wanted to hear from your brand, who were excited about the content that you're putting out there, and you were producing it in an inexpensive way, you were re-gearing your marketing organisation to produce content in a cost-effective way, such that you could build this, this audience who are interested in your brand at a cost-effective way that is comparable to broadcast advertising. So you start to build a group of people who you then can introduce commercial sales, who you can potentially sell, cross-sell into products, or you can find new ways of driving revenue from that audience.
So what would that look like? Perhaps you have an example of someone who's doing that, really doing it well. How practically does that look?
So we have a great client, which is a really good example of this, United Airlines, where they have it's a really high interest area, travel. They've got a really strong proposition because as United Airlines is a truly American airline, so certainly in the UK where we produce their content strategy for them, there's a real opportunity to build a brand around being the people who you can get closer to the real America. So for United Airlines, what a great story that they can tell, which is we're the airline that can take you to the smaller town America, can take you to the real America. That's a great platform for content that not only is interesting enough and you could produce relatively inexpensively, that people will want to listen to, because what traveller doesn't want to find out more about the destination they're travelling to, but it really lands a brand difference for that airline too. So it really starts to cement why United over a Virgin or over a British Airways.
Yeah. So United Airlines, I think, is a great example just because they've come so far in terms of their relationship with an audience. United Airlines, as I understand, have been one of those brands that have really been mired in a lot of customer complaints, including some even viral videos that have been created about them.
A very funny viral song, it's worth checking out.
Yeah, and for our audience, what's it called? It's with the guitars.
Yeah, the guitar. I can't remember the name of the guy, but it's a very funny guitar guy who was basically peeved off at service that he got on the airlines and wrote a song about it.
Yeah, we're going to put that in our show notes. But I think that what's really interesting for me is how they seem to be using content in order to rehabilitate their image with an audience. And I mean, do you feel that content can play that role for a brand?
I think it can do. I think rehabilitation is probably possibly too strong a word, because I think it's certainly in the UK where that perception doesn't really exist too much. In fact, the challenge that they're facing really is lack of brand awareness. So although it's a big name, United Airlines, and if you had prompted awareness on it, people have probably heard of it, but they've probably heard of it from films and Hollywood's output rather than from any direct experience. So actually, the role in this case is brand building. Is trying to give that. And one of the fundamental points of brand building is having something unique about your brand that's memorable, and therefore having a content proposition that says something unique about the brand. It means that you're going to be remembered.
So I love the idea that you use content to build that brand awareness. But what type of content actually does that for a brand? What kind of messages do a brand need to say? Is it content around like adding value to lifestyle? Where do brands need to play in order to connect with their potential audiences?
Yeah, and this is the role of good content strategy. So actually, a shout out to Tara Marsh, who's our global head of content, and so she's come up with some principles around content currencies. So content currencies is her approach, which is basically says that there are, I think, a number of categories of value of content that you can bring to audiences. So it might be utility, it might be inspiration, it might be just pure procrastination. So finding different territories, so pure entertainment. So finding territories where your brand can credibly play. So back to that example, thinking about the channels, thinking about the particular content categories that play to that overarching idea, that then give you deep pools of topics that you can keep publishing on an ongoing basis. I mean, that's a really obvious example about how you might bring together powerful content. Another great example for us, which I'll probably move on to talk for the rest of the time, is actually The Sun, which is Britain's biggest newspaper. So that's a really interesting story, and again, probably a call out to my colleague Matt Redman, who's been instrumental in this as well, who I believe you guys have met. Fantastic head of content in the UK, and he's helped us, along with our client, build a really, really powerful, really, really super engaged audience for the Sun brand in football. So again, a high interest category. It's a famous paper for football, but actually younger people aren't really buying it for football these days because they don't default to a physical paper. They default to online for their sources of news. So we've built a whole content strategy about making them the force in football again. Making them, they were once again a nice simple high level objective, which is to be the most talked about brand in football, and that's something that we've been able to help them get to with content.
Do you think that you ever get a scenario where the content's so good? Like, for instance, we have Nando's in South Africa that makes incredible content that's just consumed by people all across the board from all different, demographics, etc. Not necessarily people who consume the product. Do you think you ever get a setting where the content's so good that people keep coming back to consume your content, but then aren't, taking the next step to actually be purchasing the product?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that's a good thing. Ultimately, the way that brands work, it's not a linear connection with brands. We don't rationally make decisions where we go, hey, I've seen that ad, I'm now going to go into the shop. As you know from your work on Coke, a lot of the roles that the communications play is around mental availability and salience. So actually making that brand the brand that you think of when you go into that category. Yeah. So for Nando's, even if they haven't yet taken the step, over the threshold and gone and bought the food, the chances are, if they think about kind of a grilled chicken peri-peri kind of category and they walk past one, then it's going to be front of mind, and they're going to walk past and walk in, and because they're engaged with the content. I mean, another really nice thing that we're starting to think about is we want not only the content to be shared, so we want to put on not only great content that's shareable, but we want people to be proud of the brand that they're sharing it from. We want almost people, if we want, say you're working for Nando's, we'd love that the people who are sharing a funny video that you've made for them to be also kind of giving props to Nando's in that and saying, you should follow these guys, they're really brilliant. So we think it's a great way of starting to build engagement and drive word of mouth, and that's going to lead to salience, which is always a good thing for a brand.
And I love that, and I think it's so important to understand that content does not necessarily have to have a sales objective. And the guy that I love in terms of what he says about it is Gary Vaynerchuk, who has this philosophy around jab, 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 right hook, which speaks to jabbing with people with content that merely adds value to their lives, but learning enough about them so that you can eventually hit a right hook and a sales message. And I think
that's a super aggressive metaphor.
I know, but he is a super aggressive American social theorist whose book I recommend, which is really cool.
Sure.
It's also the evolution of content, because we've been in a space now where content is really the only way we can break through consumers. We've got ad blockers that are preventing us from doing banner marketing and hard sell messaging online. People aren't looking for that kind of messaging. In fact, they're tuning off and shutting it out. So we've got to find a way in, and content is the bait upon which we fish for people. But we've got to have a hook in order to get them into our space and get them to buy our products. And I think that also, goes back to a very important point around what Wunderman do well, which is around how do we harness the data that we gather from the content that we do in order to drive more effective and personalized sales-based communication with people. I don't know if, Esther, you have anything to add to that?
Well, no, I just know that a big drive globally for us for Wunderman at the moment is the idea that we're data inspired, creative driven. So the creative process starts at understanding the data behind who our consumer is, etc. We'd love for you to unpack that a little bit and unpack the ideas around that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think data is super powerful for creative, and I think what we're doing from a content perspective is there are lots of tools that allow you to make better decisions about the sort of content you're thinking of putting out there in the first place. So tools, from external tools like Quid, which do content analysis and topic analysis, understanding which categories are really going to resonate and really going to be highly engaged, are really going to drive engagement, through to then understanding in a real-time way what content's really working and doing more of the stuff that's working. So we put data intelligence both in our content planning and absolutely in our content understanding what's working and optimization. Certainly then we're starting to get into a world where we're building DMPs for clients, and we're starting to be able to understand how, what content types are people specifically engaging with, and could we then build them into an ongoing kind of customer communication platform. For the clients I'm talking about now, we're not yet doing that, but there is a hell of a lot of data. One of the founding principles, the work that we did on the Sun that I talked about, that Matt Redman introduced, was kind of the idea of data journalism. Data means that you can produce stuff that people want to read and that gets shared, that people are interested in, rather than just producing what a single writer thinks is powerful. So I think that's really interesting. But whilst I mentioned that, I think it's also important to mention that you've got to be really smart about this. The reason that we talk about creatively driven data inspired is it's not one linear connection between, right, this works, we're going to plug away and keep doing that. It's not about severing the importance of creative vision, of brand vision, of spotting a big cultural opportunity and doing something which has not been done before. So it's super important that this is a real balance. We really believe in having amazing writers. So one of the key things that we do in content is hire great topic specialists. So if we're working in travel, we'll hire a travel writer. If we're working in football, we'll have a football writer, and we'll have a group of brilliant creative minds who are creative and exciting and thrilling to listen to when they talk about football, and give them the freedom to create new and exciting stuff. So it's not just about rooting everything in a linear data story, but it's really the best of creative cultural invention, matched with the ability to then understand where to point that creativity and how to understand whether it's working and what to do more of.
Thank you for that answer. I think it's really fascinating to unpack sort of where Wunderman stand from and the interplay between data and content to drive commerce and ROI for brands. So I think that's really important. Another question I'd like to ask is, I'd looked at a statistic that said business-to-consumer marketers are spending 50% of their budgets on distribution of content. And to what extent does the distribution of content play a critical role in how brands are now using content to communicate or engage with consumers and build audiences?
It's critical. The days of marketers having a kind of free lunch on Facebook, are well and truly over. Particularly Facebook, pay close attention to how you. In fact, originally on the Sun, we built a very powerful had rapid growth in the audience there on Facebook, and Facebook quite quickly spotted that we were doing very well and started to throttle the algorithm to make sure that we were then paying to get a bit of reach there, which is, hey, they are ultimately a media platform. So I think paid for distribution is an essential. You have to do it to get out there and to get reach. Hopefully your content is strong enough that you will be driving organic reach as well, and you'll, again, but to drive discovery in the first place, it's super important. And given that Facebook is a place where people spend a lot of their time, I think actually putting some money into channels like that to sustain engagement is really important, and similarly in Twitter. So I think paid for distribution is an essential part of the mix. You want your content to be good enough. I mean, interestingly, we were having a discussion in the office the other week about what is content and how does it differ from advertising, and we came up with a kind of very loose definition that content is stuff that you want to read, that you want to view, that you want to see. So you go to it, or you kind of choose to consume it rather than it being forced upon you. And I think that's really exciting for content, the idea of brands trying to create stuff that people want to consume. That's cool. That's really cool that people want to consume, people want to interact with. So I think even in a world where you're paying for the distribution, to maintain that lovely ideal, the lovely sort of idealistic sense that, right, we're trying to create stuff that people want to read, want to consume. I think that's a really powerful thing to hold on to, even if we are paying for distribution.
So yeah, I think I've got another very interesting question. Actually, I do have one.
We'll see.
And I was going to mention that if you're building a crack team for football, I'm your guy. I support Tottenham. I just wanted to ask you a question around. So, we've spoken a lot around content and how important it is for brands to start utilizing content as a means of building audiences. And I think it's really important to bring it back to our local context here in South Africa, where content is still emerging. It's still, the way that our clients and our brands are looking at content, it's still in a chrysalis. It's not quite formulated at the advanced level of international markets. And not all brands are using content in an optimal way. I think that also brands feel very limited by platform in terms of how they perceive content and what content is meant to do. So, for example, we'll think in terms of your tweets, your Facebook posts, maybe your Instagram images, and not necessarily holistically in terms of content and what that needs to do. So what advice would you have for us trying to sell in an advanced content offering to a client who potentially isn't there yet, and in a landscape that potentially isn't there yet? How do we future-proof our clients for what's coming?
I think it comes back to brand. It comes back to understanding that I think I kind of recognise the situation you're in terms of the market maturity, and I think content did used to be run by the intern who was like, okay, well here's the 19-year-old who understands Facebook, he can manage Facebook, and I think that was the way it was certainly in Europe as well. That social was, and you'd get all sorts of bizarre stuff on social because you'd have, in fact, I mean the same thing happened before social with web marketing. Originally, web marketing, you had all these bizarre websites from brands because it was run by the sort of 20-year-old who knew nothing about the rest of the business and just got to do whatever the hell he wanted on the internet. And I think social was a bit like that as well. It was a job that was taken on by those who fancied it rather than someone who really saw it as important. I think elevating it to something that is of critical to your brand it is a really important part of the brand experience. So elevating it to a business critical, brand critical function where it's rooted in a brand purpose, a shared ideal, as we use at Wunderman as a sort of central tool. If there's a real strong purpose to that brand, that purpose is demonstrated through everything it puts out, including the content that it puts out across all of its channels. So you have to think purpose down. How do you best exhibit that purpose? How do you best demonstrate that? How do you best deliver on it and make your promise come true for your customers by doing it across all of your different channels in the best way possible on each of those channels? So I think you have to think holistically from brand down, from customer understanding, and then using each of those channels in a framework that delivers right up to the brand. And one important thing that I didn't mention in that section was out of that brand purpose is service, is customer service on social too. So I think that's another aspect. And when we talked about content currencies earlier, there's of course there's the inspiration, there's the entertainment, there's the utility, but actually delivering a strong customer service proposition is an absolutely essential part of delivering your total brand experience in a brilliant way through content.
And I think also from where we're moving into at the moment, and hopefully, well, I'm an advocate for this and I've been shouting for it very loudly here in this agency, it's a lot easier to sell the idea around content and what we should be creating when you're helping your clients or you're helping the brand understand where they're missing the mark. So by using data to expose where the South African consumer currently is and how far off we are from that, and then the understanding starts to grow about, okay, why do we need to change our content strategy and why do we need to have a content strategy? If there's one thing that you would like, and I think this was an incredible conversation, gets me very excited, it's definitely where I'm at the moment, but if there was one thing that you would like to leave with our listeners today, what would it be around this topic?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say I love your last point, actually, just around one of the most powerful tools we've had for getting content elevated in terms of the importance to the brand is strong analytics, which say, look, if people, this is going back a few years now, why do we need to invest in this stuff? Rolls-Royce was one brand that we kind of helped to take into Facebook. It's like, well, your customers are using it and all of your brand fans are using it, showing them the conversation, showing them what's happening and showing them that other people are already getting great traction on there is tremendously powerful way to make them realise how important it is. So no, I really like that point. I just wanted to kind of support it.
Thank you.
In terms of the final thought, it's a tricky one. Interesting conversation. I think for me, just the word I keep coming back to, which is purpose. If you really have a strong strategy, a really strong opportunity space to find that says, right, look, our brand stands for something, we believe in what it stands for, we believe that it offers value to a broad audience of people, then really make sure that you know exactly what that is, really work hard to define the purpose of your content, and then get out there and live it and make it really come alive. I think that's the most powerful part of content.
Thank you, Richard. This has been a really awesome conversation, and I'm as excited as Esther, if not more so. And it's not a competition, I just want to say. But so I'm sure that people will really want to find out more about this topic and find out more about you. So if you can give them a bit of direction in terms of what they need to do, that would be great.
Okay, great. So admission here, I'm not the most prolific of people on Twitter, but I certainly do have a Twitter account, which is @RichardDDunn. So certainly follow me on that, but also message me on that. So if you did want to pick up on the conversation, then feel free to message me on Twitter. And I'll be really happy to get involved and discuss more.
Thanks, Richard. And thank you for listening to the Brave Ideas podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. And while you're there, give us a rating and a review.
For more awesome content, please visit the Brave Ideas blog, which you can find at aquaonline.com/Brave Ideas podcast. Also, if you want to get involved in the conversation, please follow @AquaBraveIdeas on Twitter or Brave Ideas Podcast on Instagram.
If you want to keep in touch with me, Dan, you can follow me at elhermo on Twitter, that's ELHERMO, and elhermo23 on Snapchat and Instagram. And you can follow Esther.
You can email me at esther.mcgeer@live.com.
Special thank you to Richard Dunn, our guest. Thanks to Matthew Kubanski for music and production. Thanks to Johan Buerta and Eros Khoos for the art direction. And thank you to our distribution team, Safiso Kumalo, Magesh Ramsamy, Kirsten Wiggle, Sabelo Kanide, and Nicola van der Meulen.
That brings us to the end of the show. We'll leave you with one final thought. There are no original ideas, only original people.